Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the second session of the New Professionals Interest Group's career webinars. I'm Clea Stradom, and I'm the or vice chair for events for the New Professionals Interest Group. And I'm joined today by Daniel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel. I'm from the Government Attorneys Interest Group Executive Board, and we are the interest group for all present, former, and wannabe government attorneys who are interested in international law.
So the New Professionals Interest Group launched this career panel to shed a light on and also answer some questions about different career pathways that are available to people who are interested in international law. And today's session is really about different roles you can have in government, specifically the US government, as it's the American Society of International Law, but these roles being international law focused.
And today we have 4 speakers who represent just some of the places in the government where attorneys can have the opportunity to work on international legal issues. From the Treasury Department's Office of the Assistant General Counsel for International Affairs, we have Adam Schupak. He was also one of my former classmates from Duke Law. From the Justice Department's Office of Foreign Litigation, we have Gene Davidson. From the Peace Corps' Office of General Counsel, we have Diane Bradley. And now from the State Department, but always from ASIL, we have Wes Rist.
Thank you so much for joining us and offering up your time. We will have a session time at the end to answer some of the audience's questions. So I ask you to please pose these questions in the Q&A function that you can find at the bottom of your screen towards the right of the screen, close to the leave button, but please don't leave, not yet. I'm going to ask, before we sort of have a roundtable discussion and delve into some more specific questions, I'm going to ask our speakers just to walk us through their careers, what motivated them to get into international law, and how they landed in their current position. I'm going to start the way it's on my screen. So I'll give it over to Diane Bradley.
Thank you, Clea. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. As everyone mentioned, my name is Diane Bradley. I'm an Associate General Counsel at the Peace Corps in the Office of General Counsel. And I've been working there for about 3 years now in my capacity as an attorney. And just to kind of give you somewhat of a background of what I do with the Peace Corps, is I actually am the litigation attorney, and I handle all matters pertaining to any litigation matter where individuals, or for that matter, entities or companies or others may want to sue the agency for whatever claim or issues that arise. I also manage the privacy and also the Office of CIO, where I deal with cybersecurity issues as well as privacy issues for the agency, in addition to any FOIA issues that may arise. And I also provide support to our programming staff attorneys and with regards to providing litigation support for different areas around the world, if you will, for the various places where we have posts and whatever legal issues that may arise pertaining to litigation. So in that sense, that's my role there. But I came into the international law field with Peace Corps actually from a civil rights background. I worked for a couple of federal agencies that dealt with employment discrimination issues, particularly the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. As a civil rights learning trial attorney there. That gave me an opportunity to basically continue my interest in public interest work and also doing work in the civil rights arena. So international law kind of is an expansion on human rights issues around civil rights, things of that nature. So it was a good segue for me to join Peace Corps in that matter, and that it kind of rounded out my career in doing public interest work, public service work, and also stay in the arena of civil rights and human rights issues. So I've had a number of experiences in the public and private sector dealing with civil rights issues. So in essence, this is kind of a culmination of my career in the arena of public interest law and public service.
Great, thank you, Diane. Wes, I'll hand it over to you. You're next on my screen.
Sure. So as was mentioned, I'm Wes Rist. I am now at the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations at the State Department, which is not what most people think of when they think of law at the State Department. I got into international law completely accidentally. I did not go to law school wanting to do international law. I wasn't even really aware of it. I did study abroad as something that I couldn't do it during undergrad, so I did it during law school. And I fell in with this wonderful crowd of international human rights lawyers who literally seconded me into it and just were like, we're going to make you do this and it'll be good for you. And they were right. And I fell in love with it as a career option. I had one of those incredibly windy careers that did not have a clear guiding principle of where I was going. I was following things that were of interest and things that opened up that gave me opportunities. So for a while, I was a law professor and ran the international program at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. While I was there, I did a lot of local government international law consultations. So the city of Pittsburgh is a human rights city, and it wanted to be more than just that in name. So they actually did trainings and education for city officials and townships and everything on international law compliance. That's also where I learned that it's not like I walked in the first day with printouts of the ICCPR and then quickly realized that's not how this is going to go. It was my first introduction to the overlap of law and policy and how that works on international law. Eventually, I left Pittsburgh, came to DC, and as was mentioned, I worked at the American Society of International Law for over a decade. I ran our international law programs, and I focused on what has become my career, which is atrocity prevention issues, which is this, again, weird intersection of law and international law and policy. And that is what I do full time now. I work on that kind of cooperation around prevention efforts on atrocity crimes, which is a challenging thing within the international law space. But also is critical from a policy perspective. And I'll speak to it later, but one of the things that's been exciting to see is how my international law background joining a policy team has been incredibly valuable, even though they haven't had an international lawyer before, and has made a big difference. So I'll wrap up there, Clea.
Great, thank you, Wes. Adam, you're next.
Thank you, Clea and Dan, and thank you. I'm pleased to be on the panel with these great panelists. I also took sort of a winding route to international law. I went to law school hoping that I would come out and do international law. I was in the JD-LLM program in international and comparative law at Duke, where Dan also attended. And I studied abroad in Hong Kong during law school and worked in Japan my summer after 1L year. But like many people, I think coming out of law school, I ended up going into private practice in Chicago at a big firm, and did that for a couple of years, and in nothing related to international law whatsoever. I was doing sort of corporate restructuring and bankruptcy, and then I clerked for a couple of years on the Third Circuit in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and got a job at a mid-size Philadelphia commercial litigation firm, and spent about 5 years in private practice, doing commercial litigation, some election law, but not anything related to international law. And, fortunately had the opportunity to join the Treasury Department in the Office of the Assistant General Counsel for International and Comparative Law, and still am not entirely sure how they hired me, but I get to work on fascinating legal issues related to international economic and monetary policy. Very much see the interaction between law and policy on a regular basis. Also get to work on the advising the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS, on sort of national security issues. And I think, I think ultimately, the message, I would like to convey is if you're interested in international law, it may take some time to, for you to find a role, but don't give up that interest. I think, I certainly did not expect when I was practicing law in Chicago and Philadelphia at firms not doing international law that I could eventually find my way back into international law. But was able to have been able to do that and have really loved it. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Seems the thread is that no one really expected to land where they are or took a few windy roads. Great, and our final speaker is Davidson.
Yes, hi. It's a pleasure to be here and with this wonderful panel, some of whom I've worked with for many years. I don't recall when I became interested in international law. It seems like it's been my whole life, and it may have started with some early foreign travel as a child with my family. But it's always been an interest of mine. I was a Middle Eastern Studies major in college and took international law classes in law school. But around the time I graduated from law school, international trade was kind of dominating the field. And so I became an international trade lawyer. I was at a firm for about 5 years and practiced a lot of international trade law. And then eventually I went to work for the Justice Department, again, still practicing international trade law, representing the United States before the Court of International Trade, which is a US domestic court that specializes in trade disputes. And I've done that my whole life until 2 years ago, I finally relinquished that part of my portfolio. But I was always also interested in international law. And when I was at the firm, I did work on some matters that involved international law, including sovereign immunity issues, international arbitration, and the like. And I guess I have just sort of two themes which pick up on comments other people have made. One is that international law is a very broad field, and I think young attorneys should take a broad view of international law. I don't think there is an agency in the US government that doesn't have some international law issues. And many agencies have whole international law sections. Of course, the State Department is all international law. But even my office at the Justice Department, the Office of Foreign Litigation, it represents the United States, its agencies and officials in all matters in foreign courts around the world. So at any given time, we have about 2,000 cases pending in about 150 countries. We hire local counsel because we're not certified to appear in foreign courts, most of us. And so we are sort of the in-house client, but the counsel we hire would say that we are micromanagers because we manage the litigation very carefully. And the work is both criminal and civil and affirmative and defensive. So it covers any kind of law that exists in foreign countries. And we often have to be creative in translating claims that would exist under US law into claims in foreign countries or defenses in foreign countries. And I guess the last thing I would say about, the windy path is that even if you go off the international law path, and let's say for some years you are a tax attorney, or you do international arbitration, or in my case, international trade, or just commercial litigation, contract disputes, property disputes. I feel I've done all of that, and I've been a litigator for many, many years. I feel that all of that practice has helped me be a better international law lawyer. And often issues come up in my international practice where I have something to bring to the situation because of work I've done that wasn't actually in international law, but that helps me kind of have a broader view of the entire practice. So I'll end there, but it's great to be here today.
Great, thank you. Thank you for sharing all your very varied experiences with this. Civil rights and atrocity prevention, and there's a little bit of everything. In that regard, I wonder if you could all share some of the matters or issues that you work on a day-to-day basis, or if you want to something specifically that you can share with us that you're currently working on, just to give some examples of what your work encompasses. Is there anyone that would specifically like to start? I know Wes mentioned policy and international law, and maybe how those interplay in your work on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I can jump in on that because we just released something publicly, literally 48 hours ago, that is relevant to this. So I work on the atrocity prevention team, as I mentioned. This is a highly specialized area. There's not a lot of people with this expertise, and there's probably less than 24 jobs in the world that do this as a full-time job. Most of the people I work with, even within the US government, that are also working on atrocity prevention issues, this is one of 3 or 4 things that's on their plate. So there's literally only 2 or 3 folks within the US government that atrocity prevention is all that they do, their sole focus. But part of what we do is in response to the Elie Wiesel Act on genocide and atrocities prevention. And one of the things that requires is an annual report to Congress. And so the State Department serves as the secretariat, and my bureau specifically, to bring all of that together from not just the State Department, but DOD, Department of Justice, USAID, Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Council. It's a major interagency effort. And so part of what I do is working on that report with an eye towards fulfilling our domestic legal obligations that Congress has given us to be in compliance. But part of what we're doing is looking at atrocity prevention, whether it's from the very early stages of actually trying to get involved in countries where no one's heard about any problems. We're seeing early warning signs, and our goal is that you never hear about the countries or where we've been participating. Like our objective is these countries never make the news for bad reasons. Like that's what we want to be doing. But we work on those all the way to the things that are in the news. Like I've been working on Sudan a lot recently. I've been working on Ukraine since I joined the department. And that includes things like accountability efforts, atrocity documentation, and responses around those things that might range from the International Criminal Court to transitional justice mechanisms, all the way to the local level to, individual tribal entities, religious minorities, ethnic groups, whatever it might be. So there's just a really wide range within the international law field that we engage with. And as Clea mentioned, like a lot of this is an overlap between law and policy. It is rarely one thing or the other. We work a lot with our colleagues in the Legal Advisor's Office, or L as we call it in the State Department. We work a lot with the Office of Global Criminal Justice. Ambassador Beth Van Schok is a longtime ASIL leader and was a mentor of mine. And we work with their office quite significantly on these kinds of issues. So at any given point in time, I'm engaging with these legal issues from a policy perspective and then translating international law requirements to policymakers who have no legal background whatsoever, but know about the realities of working within the UN system or working within the International Criminal Court system, or other systems like that. So it would be impossible for me to kind of draw a line between my policy work and my law work. They are chocolate and peanut butter, like just put together like that. I'll put a link in the chat for all of you to the Elie Wiesel report that we just released, and you'll see how that kind of legal and policy lens follows through there in what we're reporting out to Congress about this kind of work. Over.
Great, thank you. Yeah, you're on the atrocity prevention side, while Jean Davidson, you're on the aftermath of it, right?
Right.
The litigation that happens after the atrocity is committed. So you see a very different side of it again.
Yes and no. We definitely are on the litigation side, but we also are involved in the interagency and within the Department of Justice discussions, which occur very, very frequently about policy positions the US should take in areas like atrocities. And we were always the Cassandra in the room saying, don't forget, whatever position we take might be thrown back at the United States. And while we like to think that we don't commit atrocities, and I don't think we do, there are others who don't share that view. And so we are often the ones presenting that view. There are others who sometimes have that view also. But we do get involved in policy debates and litigation avoidance discussions. We also participate in domestic US litigation, sometimes when issues of foreign or international law arise or treaty interpretation. And there we are part of the group, which includes usually state, treasury, whichever agencies are involved. DOD is often involved. And of course, the Solicitor General's office in hammering out a position for the United States. Some of the litigation matters that we've been involved in recent years, it really spans a wide range, any kind of case you can imagine. We've been deeply involved in litigation in the EU over privacy, and we're now on our third agreement that authorizes transmission of data between the EU and the United States, and that has now been challenged. So in those cases, we are appearing as an amicus on behalf of the United States and trying to be sure that the EU courts have a clear and correct view of US law and policy in this area. In the beginning, we didn't participate in the first case, and the courts made a decision that included a lot of findings that we thought just weren't factually correct about our laws and regulations. So the courts have gotten better now since we've been participating. They haven't ruled in our favor, but at least they seem to have a more correct view of US law. We have thousands of cases at any given time involving what we'd call incidents, like a US government official having a car accident and there's a fatality and, a crisis erupts. Those cases usually involve the State Department also, but can involve other agencies. A lot of law enforcement agents carry arms overseas, and that can end up in an incident. And then employment cases all over the world, which doesn't sound that exciting, at least not to me, but there are people who like this area. Because the US has such a large footprint and employs people all over the world, we end up with a lot of employment litigation. And I'll just add as an example of a case that just came in, a couple days ago, as an example of the type of work we do. A governor in Palau has filed a complaint alleging that the United States and Palau are not complying with a treaty to protect the environment in Palau. And so we are working with all of the interested agencies to figure out what the basis is of this complaint and how to respond to it.
Yeah, I'd also like to add to with regards to kind of piggyback on what Jean has just shared. We work very closely with the Foreign Litigation Branch in our office. Yes,
Yeah.
we've worked on a couple of cases together.
Yeah.
And so with that, again, as Jean had mentioned, with Peace Corps, we have about 1,200 what we call direct hires, and those are individuals who work directly for the agency who are federal employees. But with regards to the number of contractors we have is well over close to maybe 10,000, actually what we call personal service contractors who work at various posts around the world where we are located. And oftentimes there are a number of employment matters that comes up at posts for those particular contractors who work with the agency. So that it could be any issues around such as reductions in force, and who gets hired, and for that matter, who stays on, issues around sexual harassment, or for that matter, pay issues. That's where contracts comes in as well with regards to what our contract says, and for that matter, what, whether or not we're fulfilling the contract. There are also, again, as she said, tort claims that comes up with regards to individuals may be involved in, accidents or other types of negligent behavior or conduct. So it runs the gamut. And so not only do we work with the the foreign litigation branch, but we also have to work with the State Department, because sometimes there are issues that comes up with regards to, where the State Department needs to get involved to provide protection, or for that matter, weigh in on a particular issue where there may be a security issue. We also work very closely with the embassies. We're very much locked in step in terms of where our posts are located, and they're often co-located next to or close to the embassy, because again, as we all are aware, in certain countries, sometimes civil unrest may occur. And we need to make sure that we're in a position where we're able to get our volunteers out safely, or to protect them if necessary, if there's some type of internal conflict that's going on within the country, as well as be good neighbors and neighbors, as well as good citizens, if you will, as we perform our volunteer service in the various countries. So we work with a number of different types of agencies to ensure that we're there as a asset to the countries who invite us in to provide volunteer work. We also work very closely with USAID oftentimes in terms of some of the projects that may have some overlap with the volunteer service and projects that we have ongoing. So it could be any number of things in a wide variety of issues, as well as matters that requires, the Office of General Counsel to weigh in and to provide legal guidance and advice around those issues.
And I would just like to jump in just to sort of underscore, I think, what what other folks have shared, which is, as a government attorney, I think you really do have to be comfortable wearing multiple hats, because you do have many different roles. At a high level, speaking, for myself, we advise the international law part or the international policy part of Treasury, the International Affairs, division. And that at a very high level requires us to advise them not only on sort of international law commitments, but also on domestic law, because there will be, for instance, congressional mandates that indicate sort of how, for instance, how Treasury has to vote at the World Bank or the IMF on particular issues, or other sort of legal guardrails that are creatures of domestic law, but our clients depend on our knowing those and being able to advise them on those. So it's interesting that there's not really a sort of clear-cut division necessarily between international and domestic law. You sort of have to be conversant in both. I would also say that at a practical level, I find myself, on a daily basis wearing multiple hats. When I'm advising CFIUS, I basically have to be sort of a CFIUS lawyer and advising the policy clients on that. When I'm working on international arbitration issues in which Treasury has an interest, I have to sort of be an international arbitration lawyer. When I'm working on trade issues involving financial services, I have to be an international trade lawyer. So you find yourself wearing multiple hats and having to get conversant with both the domestic and international law in these different areas. And you also have to understand, I think, the policy as well. Our clients are the policymakers at Treasury, and we have to understand sort of their priorities and their goals in order to sort of provide them the best legal advice that we can. So there is a very clear overlap between law and policy, and it's, as Wes said, it's really hard to separate those, at least in my work at Treasury.
Yeah, it sounds like the overarching thing is that you can't see international law in a bubble, especially the way that in the areas you all work in is really much policy and international law, domestic law. And some of you touched a little bit on politics, and just quickly, if you could weigh in on, I'm sure it's to a large extent, but how geopolitics and domestic politics influences your work. As a government entities, there has to be, I mean, I understand that you can only say so much, but really about your mandate and how it influences that. And if anyone could weigh in on that this shortly.
Yeah, and I think this is where we tried out the thing that's common now, which is speaking for myself and not for my office in any capacity whatsoever. But it is one of the things, like, as I mentioned, I spent 10 years in civil society working on this issue, on atrocity prevention, before I switched over to government. And so it was a very serious conversation I had with myself when pursuing this job was, am I willing to give up being able to criticize whatever the US government does whenever I want, to step into this role and say, I want to try and make a difference from the inside? And it is an important thing for students and young professionals to realize you are, I mean, as a lawyer, you're automatically part of the system. Like the law is part of a system. It is, you can't be rebel without a cause kind of thing and be a lawyer. Like, sorry. But you are stepping even further into subsuming your personal opinions about how to do things into what is the government's perspective on this. And I've been in my new role for 5 months, and I've already run into situations where I'm like, if I were sitting on the outside, I might think about that differently than where I am sitting right now. And so that absolutely comes into play because the US government is my client and they're who I'm working on behalf of. And so, there are some things where it is my job to advocate for policy, to say this is the right thing for us to be doing because of the standards, because of this approach, because of how we should be doing it. But I am not the decision maker on that. And when a decision is made, then it's my responsibility to go along with that and to work towards achieving that. So there's already, like you were asking about geopolitics, Clea, but there's already an internal element to that as well that you have to start with. From there, you then move on to, in my field, yes, geopolitics is everything. We joke about the A word, but you start talking to countries about atrocities and they get really hesitant really fast about wanting to engage with that, even when we're just talking about warning signs or risks as opposed to ongoing. And so geopolitics plays a significant role in that. The structure of the UN, the structure of multilateral organizations, regional organizations, all of that matters a lot. I'm very privileged in that I get to work with international colleagues extensively. I just had a call this morning with a bunch of like-minded countries on atrocity issues, where we were, at the working level, talking to each other, making sure we're coordinating. That's fantastic. But you also have to recognize that even among those like-minded countries, there are different priorities, there are different capacity levels, there are different political agendas. And so at least in my field, it is baked into what we do. There is no, this is the law and this is politics and never the twain shall meet. They are wrapped around each other.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add, in terms of the geopolitical issues that arise, one of Peace Corps' mandate, and for that matter, part of the Peace Corps Act, is that it requires that in order for us to have a presence in a particular country, in a particular location, that the country has to invite us to be part of the infrastructure, or for that matter, part of the, if you will, willingness to come in and provide, whatever types of volunteer services that we provide. So with that, of course, the Peace Corps needs to ensure that, our policies our politics are aligned in terms of the countries that we choose to go into, and for that matter, where we're invited into. So there's clearly an intersection for sure with regards to, our presence, and for that matter, where we have our posts, and we've had to, in past years, had to close certain posts based on what the politics or what's going on in the country, or for that matter, if there is civil unrest or some other types of issues that prevents us from aligning ourselves or being part of the community and for that matter, the state or places where we are. So definitely that does play a role. Of course, when our volunteers are there, one of the requirements is that they can't participate in, political protest while they're there, or engage in activities that may be contrary to the particular policies, or for that matter, laws that are that may be different from what the U.S. laws are, here in the States. So, that's part of what we have to ensure we include and impart upon our volunteers as part of the training, but also with regards to the work that we do there, that, that we ensure that it's in alignment with the values of that particular country's values and laws and mores, so that we're not, we come there as part of, our mission to develop soft diplomacy in terms of, creating friendship, if you will. That's part of our mission and our logo, and our ways and slogan, in terms of we want to engage in ways in which they can learn more about, the U.S. and American ways, and hopefully, continue to impart the benefits of learning about our country, so that they can take it back to their villages or their townships or places, and benefit from the actual interactions that they have with American citizens who do volunteer service work there. So yes, geopoliticism definitely plays a role.
Well, and I'll just add, I think as a civil servant, and this is certainly something that my boss before I took the job, very much, imparted to me as well. You have to be comfortable serving through changes of administration and change, and that brings with it changes of priorities. Certain issues may be front burner for one administration and not for another. You have to be comfortable with that. If Congress is focused on something heavily, you have to be aware that it may, that your principals may focus on it as well, because they know they could be, called to testify in a hearing, for instance. And so you need to be comfortable with that. And certainly the geopolitics, as the things that you read about, in the news, I mean, our agencies have to confront those issues as well, and deal with them. And so priorities can change. And you have to just be cognizant of what your role is. And speaking as someone who works for the Treasury Department, one of the other things about working for an agency like that, obviously as a person, I'm interested more broadly in sort of international law and things like atrocity prevention and all of these other issues. But that's not Treasury's primary mission. So there are issues that may come up where, maybe not atrocity prevention, but other issues where Treasury ultimately may not decide to sort of take a formal position or engage, because it's not our mission, and it's another agency's mission. So you also have to be sort of comfortable understanding your role and being a team player, and recognizing, look, there's a lot of international legal issues where it's the State Department or the Justice Department or the Defense Department. They're going to take the lead, and you're not as Treasury. But when there's international economic issues, you may have a seat at the table and lead on it.
Ben.
Clea, do you want me to address?
Yes, please. I actually wanted to ask you, especially because you said you work with, litigators in country,
Right.
and how those relationships,
Right.
because sometimes they can maybe feel like this foreign, power is imposing, and yeah.
Well, I think the answer to the question is sort of yes and no. I mean, definitely on discretionary decisions, geopolitical factors can play a role. And let's say there is an issue of whether to settle a case. Agencies with an interest, with equities at stake, might weigh in and say, don't settle this case, or do settle this case. And there might be factors at play. And I think we recognize, and it's a valid consideration, that sometimes litigation is definitely not the only matter of concern involving a foreign country for the United States at that particular moment. And there may be bigger fish that we need to fry. So that gets worked out. An example of a geopolitical storm from about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, we settled a claim against Iran in the Iran-US Claims Tribunal. And it was a sort of a joint state justice settlement, and justice had to be involved because we were paying the money out of Adams Judgment Fund. But the settlement was absolutely warranted based upon the law and the facts. We had to give Iran that money back. It was actually Iran's money, but it created a furor in Congress, and there was a huge outcry that we had given Iran any money, even though, you know, we were before a tribunal, and that was the whole purpose, was to resolve these claims. And this was an old lingering claim. So we reached the right decision there to go ahead and settle the claim, even though it did result in a firestorm. And the ramifications of that continue to today. I would say, and maybe I live in a little bubble or something, but I've been in the government now for almost 38 years, and I've never felt punished for expressing my opinion. I mean, I'm careful, and we were always told at the Justice Department that your role is to give an honest opinion, even if it's not the one your supervisors or the front office or the attorney general really wants to hear. They need to hear it if that's your honest opinion. So I'm very careful to be sure that there's a basis for my opinion, and that I think it really is the right approach. But I've never been punished in any administration for advocating a position, even though, you know, I would say I may not prevail and my position might be overruled. But often I find, you know, where you stand depends on where you sit, and people don't want to make the wrong decision. And at least in the Justice Department, our political appointees really do want to get it right. And so they do listen to different views. They may come in with their own kind of agendas and views of the law. And there are some areas of the law that may be more subject to policy views than others. But you know, I think it's the role of the government lawyer is to provide the best advice possible, and do your homework. Make sure that you're not going to get shot down because this is just a, you know, shooting from the hip. Definitely don't do that. But if you have done your homework and you think this is the right approach, I think it's our job to forward that up the channel, and then to accept that there are definitely going to be different points of view, and your view may not prevail.
Great. Yeah, I guess there's also a difference about internally expressing your views. And then, you know, once a decision has been made, supporting that decision.
Right. Well, then as a civil servant, you have to comply because we're a democracy.
Exactly. Exactly. I think we'll ask some questions have been posed. I'll hand over to Daniel. He's going to pose some of the questions that have been asked by our participants. So.
Yeah, thanks, Clea. So if you have questions you'd like to ask, place them in the Q&A little box, and I will try and get to them. I want to start with the question about how do we actually get involved? We're all interested in international law, but how is it that we get one of these jobs? And I want to break that into two parts. First, what skills would you say are particularly useful, or attributes do you or the hiring officials in your office look for? Prior private practice experience, clerkships, foreign language experience, etc. And then second, what is the actual mechanism that you use to get where you are, or that you use when you're hiring? Is it just USA Jobs? Are there other websites to look at? And how important are connections, the network of people that you know or that you developed in actually accomplishing your goal of getting one of these positions?
So I think the first part there, Daniel, is is in part dependent upon what kind of international law you want to be working on. There are some generalist skills, as Adam mentioned, like there are some things like, and many of us are just inherently generalists because of the breadth of the topics that we've got to work on. Even with me in as specialized of a field as I am, there are just still things that it's useful to have. So strong analytical skills, strong communication skills. I cannot emphasize enough how important writing is, and being able to write briefly and concisely. This is one of my practical tips. If you have an opportunity to submit a writing sample, do not submit, and it's like a 10-page maximum. Don't submit a single 10-page document, because that's not the kind of writing you are likely to be doing. But if you've got 5 2-page documents, that's probably much more in line with the kind of writing you'd actually be doing, and maybe much more helpful to a hiring manager to figure out if you've actually got the writing skills that they need. Outside of Gene's office with, direct foreign litigation, even they are supervising foreign litigators. Very few lawyers are writing in the government, are writing briefs. That's DOJ land, and it's very narrow that it's international law briefs of that kind of size. L attorneys talk about, the thrill of being able to work on like an ICJ brief, because it just doesn't happen all that often of that length. So short, concise, targeted writing, able to distill information and put it into a usable format for people who are not expert, like talking to non-experts, really critical. Being able to convey expert information to non-expert people, really critical. In terms of the second part, the process, USA Jobs is important. I used to tell students this all the time when I did the trainings for ASIL, but you should feel like you are plagiarizing the job description when you write your resume for USA Jobs, because it's a computer algorithm first. So the algorithm checks your resume first before you move on. So if you're not using the language from the job description in your resume, you're not showing up on the roster. You're not there. It's not that someone's looking at you and rejecting you. They're not seeing your application. Mm-hmm. The second thing I would highly, highly emphasize is alternative means pathways in. So for those of you who are still students, presidential management fellowships, Pickering fellowships, Wrangel fellowships, all of those are honors programs. All of those are phenomenal avenues in. The neat thing about PMFs is you do a year in one spot and then you do 2 6-month rotations somewhere else. The place that you start off with is supposed to hire you permanently, and most of the time does. But sometimes you may find your 6-month rotation is like, oh, this is what I want to be doing. And you can it doesn't cost, like if I'm at CSO, if someone says I want to come and work with Wes on atrocity prevention, I'm a PMF. It doesn't cost my bureau anything to give them that opportunity. It's free. Like they're being paid for out of a separate pot of money. So we get 6 months of help for no cost for us. Like throw your net widely and say, I want to go experience this in government or do that on a PMF. It's a fantastic resource. The other thing to watch for is contracts. Unfortunately, hiring is slow, can take a long time, especially within the State Department and many of the other big bureaus or agencies. So we often hire contractors. State Department, my bureau uses Tuvely. There are many other private contractors. You are technically an employee for a private contracting organization, but you work at the State Department, or you work at Defense, or you work at USAID. Watch those. They are often posted faster. They are less frequently posted with a specific person in mind or a specific type of person in mind. And more importantly, they are often posted without the assumption that you have to have a clearance already. And so they can be a great first step to get in, get your foot in the door, get a job, get clearance. I would emphasize that my experience working with people in government that have ended up doing international law is often that they don't start doing international law in government. They start doing something else and then transition to a different job. Getting your foot in the door is by far the most important thing. Obviously, if you can qualify for and get selected for an international law job right up front, fantastic, great. But getting in the door is an important part of this. And it's always easier to move within the system than it is to step into the system from outside the first time.
Yeah, I'd also like to add on to what Russ is saying. and also kind of address the question about, is it how important it is to get in touch with, or for that matter, your network, with regards to who's doing this type of work. I say that's extremely important. And now that, there's a number of different avenues, ways in which you can, tap into and reach out to people who are doing this type of work. LinkedIn is one of the major tools I think that people should utilize with regards to, people who are doing the work that they're interested in. And, you can DM them and say, hey, do you have 10 minutes where we can just have a informational talk or informational chat about the work that you do? Those type of avenues are incredibly important. But I would also add that I think what's often underutilized for students or young professional is the professional organizations like the DC Bar. It has a number of communities that, deal and that the attorneys are part of, what they call, international law division or program communities. Participate in those programs, go to their webinars or their seminars, meet face to face. And also, they also have pro bono programs where you have an opportunity to actually work alongside an attorney who does this type of work. And, in that way, that'll give you not only the experience that you can put on your resume, but also, put you in touch with individuals who are doing the type of work that you're interested in. Because oftentimes people, when there is a position open, they do think about their network, who they know who may be qualified or interested in the field, and they'll reach out to them. So yes, those are also avenues.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up as well and say, I think first and foremost, when you're starting your career, and you're going out in your first jobs, no matter where it is, just try to be a good lawyer, try to be a good lawyer, be responsive, develop relationships with people where you are, even if it's in private practice or clerkships, or, if you're working in sort of the domestic side for a government agency, because ultimately, if you're looking to do international law, those contacts are going to be helpful. And even if they're not going to get you a job, on the international law side, rest assured, if you apply for something, you're going to have to list references and people will call them and talk to them. And, they want to hear that you have the analytical skills, that you're responsive, that you're a good, team player, that you can listen and understand complex issues. So I think that's first and foremost. I applied on USA Jobs. I think I originally saw the post on LinkedIn. I think I almost didn't, because it's an onerous process, and I wasn't really sure that I had the right background for the job, but went ahead and did, and it turns out that that there is no one right background for at least in our office. We do hire people. We do only hire people, I think, that have practiced for a number of years. That could be private practice, that could be government practice, but I don't think we generally hire people sort of right out of law school. We like to have people with some practice experience, but that could be varied. Our office has, government attorneys who were at state or USTR or the Commerce Department. We have people in private practice who are M&A lawyers. We have litigators, former securities lawyers. So there is no one background. And I think, we like to have sort of a diverse range of expertise and backgrounds in our office. That's really a high priority. So, I would say, don't just assume that if you come out and don't get a job in international law initially, that your path is forever sort of closed off. And I also will say, I didn't have any connections specifically in Treasury at all when I applied. So also, I think connections are great. And I think it's really, really helpful. I mean, in some ways I felt, very lucky that I got a job without it. But I also think, you should apply even if you don't have the connections, but it certainly helps to talk to people and sort of try to get a sense of what people, what people actually do day to day. And the last point I'll just add is, the federal government is very, very large. And it's, there are many agencies that have international law folks or international policy folks who would consider a lawyer for those positions. And that runs the gamut. I mean, everything, from sort of the SEC and the FDIC to, to other agencies that you wouldn't think of. And, as Wes said, it's really important to try to find a path in. And sometimes that path in may not be sort of at the State Department or what you think of as kind of one of the premier international, law agencies, but could be through a smaller agency. So make sure you cast your net broadly.
I don't have too much to add to all of these great points. I agree with all of them. I would just, I guess, make two additional points. One is don't hesitate to volunteer for work you like. If you're at a law firm and you're assigned to a big, boring case, reviewing documents, and you know that there's something else in the office you'd like to work on, do it appropriately. You don't want to offend anyone, but often you can express an interest. And if that doesn't work out, those people will remember that you were interested in the area the next time. Or within the government, if you see something that's interesting to you, often you can volunteer to work on it. And so there are ways to kind of maneuver toward the work you want, even if your initial assignment isn't exactly your dream, task. This sometimes means taking on double duty, but it may pay off in the end. And the other point I'd make is just don't lose heart. I mean, often if agencies haven't responded to your application, 99% of the time it has nothing to do with you, maybe even more than 99% of the time. Maybe the agency is still plowing through all the applications it received. Maybe somebody's on leave or is slow to finish their review of their pile of resumes. It probably has nothing to do with you. It doesn't hurt to inquire. Sometimes that can get you a little attention if you just call and ask, you just wondered about the status. And that can kind of get you a little attention. In terms of contacts, I think you have to be careful. It does help, and especially as references, to list as references people who are known in the office you're applying for. But having someone make a call at a political level or some sort of insider level can kind of raise some red flags sometimes. There is a fairness due process aspect to hiring in the government, and people are supposed to be treated the same. And so I think you have to be a little careful about that, but it does help, especially if you have references that are known to the office. So that's all. And, I guess don't assume that if you're working on something that isn't international law, that it won't help you later, because it just adds to your skill set and more arrows in your quiver. And down the road, you may be the only person in a room of international lawyers that actually knows something about a subject that's being discussed. So take a long view of your career and, just keep working toward what you want.
Great, thanks. I think we're out of time. I know Ms. Bradley needs to run off. She has a hard stop. But we definitely want to thank everyone for everything that you've shared with us. Also to let everyone know that our two interest groups, the New Professionals Interest Group and the Government Attorneys Interest Group, are going to be working on putting together kind of a how-to guide for this whole how to get a job in the government working on international law, which we hope to have ASIL put out in the coming months. So keep an eye out for that. And if you are interested in getting involved either with the society or with either of our interest groups, they are free and open to all members. So feel free, you can find out how to join. Just go to the ASIL website and go to the interest groups, and we're happy to have you, and you get these awesome newsletters. So that's all I have. So I'll give it to Clea to close us out.
Yeah, I just want to close out by saying thank you very much. There were some very insightful information. Thank you, Wes, for posting everything in the chat. If the audience has not seen it, there's some useful resources there. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. We really appreciate it. I know we're all very busy, but it was a great pleasure having you here with us today. And thank you to the audience for attending and listening to us all today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.